We've been conditioned by Hollywood to view the Mafia as a machine of cold, calculated precision, where shadowy figures play high-stakes chess against the FBI. We imagine the sacred code of omertà and military-grade discipline governing every move of La Cosa Nostra. But if you peel back the cinematic veneer and look at the actual police reports, a very different picture emerges. For every brilliant criminal mastermind, there are a dozen wise guys who are breathtakingly, monumentally stupid. From professional hitmen losing weapons in seafood displays to fugitives getting busted over YouTube pasta tutorials, these are 10 genuine, verified, and historically documented mafia blunders that prove the greatest threat to a criminal empire isn't a federal task force, it's a total lack of common sense. Number 1. The cooking show Fugitive. In the 21st century, the influencer bug seems to have bitten everyone, from suburban teenagers to, apparently, high-ranking members of the Italian 'Ndrangheta. Marc Ferrin Claude Biart was not your average petty thief. He was a deeply embedded member of one of the most ruthless and secretive criminal organizations on the planet. For years, he had been a ghost, dodging international warrants and successfully hiding out in the idyllic, sun-drenched town of Boca Chica in the Dominican Republic. He had achieved the ultimate goal for any fugitive. He was safe, he was anonymous, and he was forgotten by the public. But Biard had a problem that many modern humans share. He was bored, and he felt his talents were being wasted. He was a passionate chef who took immense pride in his traditional Italian recipes. In a move that can only be described as an ego-driven catastrophe, he decided to launch a YouTube channel dedicated to his culinary skills. To his credit, he understood the basics of security. He never once showed his face on camera, focusing the lens entirely on his hands as he meticulously prepared gourmet pasta and regional delicacies. He likely thought he was being a genius, sharing his culture while remaining a shadow. However, Biard forgot one crucial detail. In the world of the 'Ndrangheta, tattoos are often a biographical map of a man's criminal career and personal history. During one particularly enthusiastic tutorial on how to properly knead dough, Biard rolled his sleeves up a little too high. As he worked the flour, the camera captured a clear, high-definition view of his very unique and highly identifiable forearm tattoos. The Italian state police, who were remarkably diligent in their culinary research, happened to stumble upon the video. They didn't need to see his eyes or hear his voice. They cross-referenced the ink with their database, and within days, the pasta fugitive was in handcuffs. He had traded a life of freedom in the Caribbean for a life in a prison cell, all because he couldn't resist the urge to get likes for his carbonara. It remains the most delicious way to get caught by Interpol. Number 2. The olive oil empire versus the food blogger. The 'Ndrangheta doesn't just deal in the classic mob staples of narcotics and gambling. They have a massive, multi-billion-dollar interest in the global food supply. Their most lucrative scam involved liquid gold, extra virgin olive oil. The scheme was a masterpiece of industrial fraud. The clan would purchase massive quantities of cheap, low-grade sunflower and soybean oil from Turkey. They would then transport it to Italy, where they would mix it with chlorophyll and beta-carotene to give it that perfect, premium emerald green tint and a faint peppery scent. They bottled this chemical cocktail, slapped on labels featuring rolling Tuscan hills and fake DOP certifications, and exported it to the United States. For years, they were charging top-shelf prices for what was essentially dyed vegetable oil. They were making tens of millions of dollars, and because they weren't killing anyone, they stayed completely under the radar of the FBI's traditional organized crime units. You would expect their downfall to come from a massive laboratory sting or a high-level whistleblower. Instead, the entire international operation was brought down by a single solitary food blogger with an attitude.
An American culinary enthusiast who actually knew what real olive oil was supposed to taste like bought a bottle of the mob's premium brand and was so offended by the quality that they wrote a blistering viral review. The blogger described the taste as liquid sadness and industrial grease. That one post gained enough traction to catch the attention of food safety regulators and consumer protection agencies. Once the scientists got involved and realized the olive oil contained 0 olives, the trail led straight back to the ports of southern Italy. An entire criminal empire, built on years of deception, was dismantled because they underestimated the power of a single person on the internet who really cares about their salad dressing. Number 3. The boss who scared his own men into the FBI's arms. In the 1980s, Nicky Scarfo was the undisputed king of the Philadelphia Mafia. But unlike the legendary bosses of New York, who often preferred diplomacy to war, Scarfo was a walking, talking powder keg. He was a man with a hair-trigger temper and a level of paranoia that would make a spy novelist blush. Scarfo's management style was elimination first, questions later. He was convinced that everyone was either an informant, a traitor, or a weakling, and his solution was always the same: a bullet to the head. Scarfo famously ordered hits on his own men for the most trivial perceived slights, getting a funny look from a soldier or someone not showing enough respect at a social gathering. He even reportedly considered whacking a guy because he didn't like the way he dressed. The problem with this reign of terror is a basic law of human nature. People who are terrified for no reason have no loyalty. Scarfo's soldiers looked at the situation and realized that no matter how hard they worked or how loyal they were eventually going to be murdered by their own boss over a minor misunderstanding. The result was a literal stampede toward the local FBI offices. Mobsters who had spent decades in the life were suddenly fighting each other for the chance to be the first one to flip. They didn't want the money, they just wanted to be in a place where they could sneeze without being accused of a conspiracy. Scarfo's paranoia became a self-fulfilling prophecy. By trying to kill every potential informant, he created the largest group of informants in the history of the American Mafia. He didn't just lose his family, he personally dismantled it by being so tough that his own men preferred a federal prison to his social club.
Number 5. The Sick Boss and the Staircase Sprint. Frank Funzi Thierry, the head of the Genovese crime family, was the first mob boss ever convicted of being the head of a RICO enterprise. Facing a mountain of evidence, Funzi decided to employ one of the oldest tricks in the book, the infirmity defense. He wanted the jury to believe that he was just a harmless, dying, confused old man who spent his days thinking about soup, not shakedowns. For months, Funzi gave an Oscar-worthy performance. He would show up to the courthouse in a wheelchair, draped in heavy blankets, even in the summer heat. He would shuffle along with a walker, his hands trembling, looking like he didn't even know what year it was. He was so convincing that some members of the public actually felt sorry for him. They saw a frail great-grandfather being bullied by the big bad government. However, the FBI had been running a side operation. While Funzi was acting like a vegetable in court, they had cameras pointed at his private residence. The footage they captured was a comedy of errors. The moment Funzi was out of the public eye, he would ditch the walker, hop out of his car, and literally sprint up the stairs of his home to take a phone call. The dying man was seen shouting orders, carrying heavy bags, and moving with the agility of a man half his age. When the prosecution played that footage in the middle of his trial, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. Funzi's entire defense and his reputation collapsed in an instant. He wasn't a master of deception. He was just a bad actor who forgot that in the 20th century, the all-seeing eye of the feds is always watching. Number 6. The high-fashion hitman. There is a reason why professional assassins in movies usually wear drab, unremarkable clothing. The goal is to be the man who wasn't there.
You want to be a blur on a camera, a face that nobody remembers. But in the Philadelphia mob, looking good was often more important than getting away with it. After a high-profile mob hit, the police were stuck. They had a few seconds of grainy security footage from a nearby storefront, but the shooter's face was obscured by a hood. However, the detectives noticed something unusual about the shooter's feet. He wasn't wearing generic sneakers or work boots. He was wearing a pair of extremely rare, high-end, limited-edition designer sneakers that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Instead of doing traditional detective work, the police simply started calling high-end boutiques and checking credit card records for vibe-checked mob associates. They found their man almost immediately. He was the only person in the neighborhood who owned that specific, flamboyant footwear. He had literally flexed his way into a life sentence. His need to be the best-dressed man in the room was so powerful that it overrode the most basic rule of murder. Don't give the cops a neon sign pointing to your front door. He traded his freedom for a pair of shoes that he can now only wear in a prison yard. Number 7. The SANT hitman with an 0 for 11 record. Anthony Gaspipe Casso was an underboss in the Lucchese family, and his name was synonymous with violence. He was a man who loved the idea of being a killer, but as history shows, he was functionally incapable of actually being one. Throughout his long and bloody career, Casso reportedly personally orchestrated and attempted to execute 11 separate mob hits. In a feat of mathematical impossibility, his final record was 0 wins and 11 losses. Not a single one of his targets died. He missed shots from point-blank range, his guns jammed at the worst possible moments, and on several occasions he simply went to the wrong address. On one attempt, he was supposed to take out a rival in a car. He sprayed the vehicle with bullets, but the target wasn't even inside. He had gone into a nearby deli for a sandwich. At some point, you have to stop blaming bad luck and start admitting that you are just fundamentally bad at your job. Casso was the participation trophy winner of the Mafia. He had the title, he had the weapons, and he had the anger, but he had the tactical precision of a blindfolded toddler. He proved that in the underworld, a tough guy reputation is often just a cover for someone who couldn't hit water if they fell out of a boat.
Number 8. The How-To Manual for Murder. Thomas "Tommy" Karate was a hitman for the Bonanno family, and he was a man who took great pride in his craft. Unlike most mobsters who were just street thugs, Tommy viewed himself as a professional specialist. He studied anatomy, he studied chemistry, and he studied disposal methods. He was a man who believed that if you're going to do a job, you should do it by the book. The problem was that Tommy actually wrote the book. Patera had an obsessive, almost pathological need to document his expertise. He kept detailed handwritten journals and manuals outlining his specific techniques for murder, the best way to dismember a body to avoid detection, and the specific types of tools and acids he found most effective. He even included notes for improvement on his past crimes. When the FBI finally raided his apartment, they didn't have to look for hidden compartments or secret safes. They found what amounted to a dummy's guide to being a mob hitman, authored by the man himself. It was a prosecutor's dream. He had literally provided a step-by-step roadmap for his own conviction, complete with tips and tricks. His ego and his desire for professional recognition were so vast that he provided the state with every single piece of evidence they needed to lock him up forever. He wasn't just a killer, he was his own star witness. Number 9. The 300-pound woman with a mustache. Disguises are a staple of the criminal underworld. A wig, a pair of glasses, and a fake nose can go a long way in shaking a police tail. But Salvatore "Sammy the Horse" Galante apparently thought that a disguise was a magical cloaking device that ignored the laws of physics and biology. Realizing that the police were following him through a crowded Italian-American neighborhood, Sammy decided to blend in by ducking into a storefront and emerging dressed as a woman. He threw on a bright floral sundress and a cheap blonde synthetic wig.
The problem was that Sammy was 6'3", weighed nearly 300 pounds of solid, gym-built muscle, and possessed a voice that sounded like gravel in a blender. Oh, and he also absolutely refused to shave his thick, black trademark mustache. He didn't look like a woman, he looked like a professional wrestler who had been hazed by his teammates. He didn't blend into the crowd, he became the center of the crowd. People stopped and stared, children pointed. The police, who were looking for a dangerous fugitive, instead found a man who looked like a confused grizzly bear in a tutu. They didn't even have to check his ID, they just followed the trail of laughter. Sammy proved that if you're going to go for a theatrical disguise, you might want to check a mirror before you leave the house. Number 10. The ultimate pocket dial. In the age of technology, your smartphone is your best friend or your worst enemy. For one low-level mobster, it was the latter. While he was sitting in a crowded kitchen with his associates, they began a very serious, very loud, and very detailed discussion about an upcoming hit on a rival. They talked about the piece, the getaway, and the payoff. Unbeknownst to the group, the man's phone had shifted in his pocket and butt-dialed 911. The dispatcher on the other end didn't hear a voice asking for help. She heard a 45-minute high-definition recording of a criminal conspiracy in progress. She did what any good professional would do. She put the call on the precinct speaker system. The police sat around with coffee and donuts, listening to the entire plan. They got names, they got locations, and they even got a few jokes about the local captain. It was the easiest investigation in the history of the New Jersey State Police. They didn't need a wiretap warrant or a judge's signature. The criminal had voluntarily invited them into the room. He delivered a perfectly curated confession directly to the police station while he was still planning the crime. It is the gold standard for criminal stupidity, proving that sometimes the call is indeed coming from inside the house. From designer shoes leaving breadcrumbs to a hitman who peer-reviewed his own crimes, these stories prove that organized crime is often anything but. Sometimes the biggest threat to a criminal empire isn't the FBI, it's just plain old-fashioned stupidity. Which of these blunders do you think was the most embarrassing? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more historically unhinged content. We'll see you in the next one.